Minutes ago, a historical legal challenge landed on the Home Secretary's desk behind me, one that could rewrite the UK's stance on the Palestinian struggle and armed resistance. The Islamic Resistance Movement, aka Hamas, has instructed British lawyers and formally requested to be removed from the UK's list of proscribed so-called terrorist organisations. It's not your average request, it's a several hundred-page tome backed by dozens of reports from some of the world's leading experts in law, international relations, politics, academia and journalism, backing one bold claim that the UK's continued proscription of Hamas makes it complicit in genocide. The experts include a former International Court of Justice judge, Professor John Dugard, Oxford University Professor Avi Shlaim, a member of Nelson Mandela's first government, Dr. Ismail Vaidi, and many other notable names. The challenge argues that Britain's historical role from colonization to complicity must end, that the proscription of Hamas prevents meaningful resistance to apartheid, persecution, and genocide. Here is what some of the lawyers instructed by the head of international relations and legal office of the political bureau of Hamas said when outlining the case today.
They ordered all our family to line up against the wall and they started shooting us. I was hit in the side, but most of us children were saved because we hid behind our parents. The bullet hit my sister Kadri, 4, in the head, my sister Sami, 8, in the cheek, my brother Muhammad, 7, in the chest. But all the others with us against the wall were killed. My father, my mother, my grandfather, my grandmother, my uncles and aunts and some of the children. Fahim Zaidan, 12 years old. A man shot a bullet into the neck of my sister Saleha, who was 9 months pregnant. Then he cut her stomach open with a butcher's knife. Halim Eid. I screamed, but around me other women were being raped too. Safia Atiyah. There is, however, no doubt that many sexual atrocities were committed by the attacking. Many young schoolgirls were raped and later slaughtered. Old women were also molested. One story is current concerning a case in which a young girl was literally torn into two. Many infants were also butchered and killed. British Assistant Inspector General of the CID, Richard Catling. And finally, I saw cut off genitalia and women's crushed stomachs. It was direct murder. Soldiers shot everyone they saw, including women and children. Parents begged commanders to stop the slaughter, to please stop shooting. Zavi Ankoy. These testimonies were not taken last week, last month, or even last year. They were taken 77 years ago. For on this day, on the 9th of April 1948, armed Zionist militias, led by individuals who would later go on to become leaders of the State of Israel, invaded the village of Deir Yassin and carried out a barbaric slaughter of 254 villagers, during the course of which children were burned alive, women were systematically raped, and men, women, and children were mercilessly massacred. This atrocity was one of many that formed the bedrock upon which the Zionist state was built. 77 years on, it would appear that very little has actually changed. The incremental genocide that begun in 1948 has morphed into a fully fledged Holocaust today. Britain's hands, unfortunately, are far from clean in all of this. From the Balfour Declaration in 1917 to the Nakba in 1948, and right up until today's financial, military, and political support for Israel as it relentlessly pursues its genocide, in which approximately 40,000 children, by conservative estimates, have already been killed, Britain has played a critical role in the establishment and entrenchment of the settler colonial apartheid state. While on one hand Britain arms and finances the Zionist state and allows its citizens to participate in the extermination of the Palestinian people without fear of sanction, it simultaneously, through the use of terrorism legislation and prescription powers, cripples Palestinians who seek to defend themselves. The right to resist belligerent occupation, apartheid, and genocide is firmly entrenched in international law. The Palestinian resistance in this regard has taken on different forms over the century of their freedom struggle and has appeared in the guise of the PLO, Fatah, the PFLP, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, to name just a few. The application makes arguments grounded in international law about how prescription is inconsistent with that right. Hamas won the last parliamentary elections in Palestine in what international observers, including Jimmy Carter, described as free and fair elections representing the democratic will of the Palestinian people. When these two dynamics merge, Britain's complicity with Zionism and Hamas's prescription in Palestinian society, or Hamas's position in Palestinian society, it is evident that the government's ongoing prescription is simply another means by which Britain seeks to deny the Palestinians their basic human dignity. This application seeks to remedy that ongoing illegality and presents the Home Secretary with this historic opportunity to depart from the British state's morally and legally indefensible policy of siding with Zionism against the oppressed people of Palestine. The application argues that Hamas does not operate and never has operated outside of the territory of historical Palestine. It has no presence in the UK, and it poses no specific threat to the UK or to British nationals overseas. The prescription of the entirety of Hamas ignores the ubiquity of any government's role in the everyday lives of their constituents. Hamas runs the public services in Gaza, the bureaucracy, the schools, the hospitals, the firefighters, the civilian police, even the street sweepers and the garbage collectors. The de facto Hamas administration pays their salaries. The prescription of Hamas raises key questions about whether these individuals or anyone who supports members of the public service, for example, a family member in the UK providing financial support through remittances, or is dependent on them, is potentially guilty of terrorism-related offences. It is this type of mass criminalisation and dehumanisation that leads to genocide. In its judgment justifying the imposition of provisional measures against the Zionist state in January last year, the International Court of Justice quoted the Israeli President Isaac Herzog, whose words seem to evidence the genocidal intent underlying the justification for the targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure, namely Palestinians' support for Hamas. He said, I quote, "It is an entire nation out there that is responsible. It is not true, this rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved. It is absolutely not true. They could have risen up. They could have fought against that evil regime which took over Gaza in a coup d'etat." End quote. The persecution of Palestinians has continued for too long. The ethnic cleansing appears to be in its final stages, with Gaza being erased. Now is a time for courage. This application invites the Home Secretary to take that courageous step towards a just and lasting political settlement, while she is in a position to do so. As Sophie Haspesala writes in The Politics of Prescription, I quote, "Contrary to what they claim in public, politicians often do end up negotiating with those they describe as terrorists," end quote. Former UK Prime Minister and Special Envoy to the Middle East, Tony Blair, who was instrumental in instigating the international boycott of Hamas following its electoral success, belatedly admitted that this was a mistake and a missed opportunity. Today's application is an opportunity for the Home Secretary to act now rather than express regrets later. Thank you very much. I'll now hand you to my colleague, Frank McGuinness, who's going to go into a bit more details about the application.
I have three things to say. Firstly, I'm going to discuss the context and the seemingly terminal crisis of Zionism and Israeli apartheid. Secondly, I'll explore the two historical examples of South African apartheid and British colonialism in Ireland, which shed light on the use of the term terrorism to ban organisations. Finally, I'll explain why, without supporting the organisation itself, you are able to support this application. Israel is now a pariah state and finds itself in a seemingly terminal crisis. In the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, and in domestic jurisdictions, a growing number of judgments and opinions have now fundamentally damaged Israel's standing and reputation. The ICJ's advisory opinion from July last year concluded that Israel is an apartheid state and is committing racial segregation. From as early as the 2004 advisory opinion, it has been clear that Israel's occupation, which has now lasted for more than half a century, is illegal under international law. South Africa, along with a growing number of national governments, including the EU member states of Ireland, Belgium, and Spain, have accused Israel of committing genocide. In January 2024, the ICJ ruled that it was plausible that Israel was breaching the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. In November last year, the ICC issued arrest warrants against Israel's sitting Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and its former Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant. These men are literal fugitives. Netanyahu cannot visit the territory of some of his closest allies for fear that they will arrest him. On Monday this week, the Metropolitan Police in Britain were handed a dossier of evidence and invited to prosecute 10 British nationals who stand accused of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity while serving in the Israeli armed forces. South Africa's Foreign Minister, Naledi Pandor, said of South Africans who fight in the Israeli army, I quote, "We are ready. When you come home, we are going to arrest you," end quote. Zionism is Israel's official ideology. It is the ideology of an apartheid regime and is explicitly racist. More and more people are reaching that conclusion. The ideology has become completely toxic, and even its staunchest allies are keenly aware of the increasingly unbearable price of associating with Zionism and Zionists. Israel is a pariah state. Its apartheid regime seems to be collapsing in front of our eyes. That raises the question of what will replace Israel if and when it collapses. That is the broader context in which this application by Hamas should be understood. This takes us to my second point, the historical examples of South African apartheid and Ireland. Let me start by talking about Nelson Mandela. Today, he is widely regarded as one of the most courageous freedom fighters in human history. His name is synonymous with profound integrity and with the personal sacrifices he made to confront and help defeat South African apartheid. In 1961, he founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, or the Tip of the Spear, the armed wing of the African National Congress. Britain and the United States were staunch allies of South Africa's apartheid regime of racial domination. At the notorious Rivonia trial, Mandela found himself addressing a judge who had the power to kill him. At that trial, Mandela said, I quote, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal for which I hope to live and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." End quote. He was, of course, imprisoned for decades on Robben Island. After his eventual release, he served as the first black president in post-apartheid South Africa. So today Mandela is regarded as a hero, but at the time, when it mattered most, he was labelled a terrorist, including by the British government. It's important to note how the passage of time and history can change people's perspective. Closer to home in Britain, we have the Irish example. The death of Bobby Sands while on hunger strike marks a pivotal turning point in the struggle for a united Ireland. At the time of his death, he sat on the Army Council of the Provisional IRA, a proscribed organisation. The hunger strike protested the Thatcher government's policy of criminalisation, summarised in her infamous suggestion, quote, "Crime is crime is crime, it is not political," end quote. From his prison cell, Bobby Sands won election to the British Parliament, and then he died from hunger. He was 27 years old. His electoral victory led to a fundamental strategic shift in Sinn Féin, the political wing of the Provisional IRA. The organisation's new policy of abstentionism helped lay the foundations for the Good Friday Agreement of 1998. Fast forward to today, Michelle O'Neill, a member of Sinn Féin, is the First Minister in Stormont, and Mary Lou MacDonald is the leader of the party. Mercifully, the north of Ireland is much more peaceful today than it was in Bobby Sands' time. These two historical examples are referenced in the application. They provide important historical context for the way that people's perceptions of organisations designated as terrorist can and do change over time. This takes me to my third point, which is the application itself. What is it about? How can you understand it? And how can you support it if you want to? Someone can support an application for deproscription without supporting the organisation that makes it. Nothing in the application changes the law as it currently stands, and all of the potential offences in relation to Hamas remain for as long as the Secretary of State maintains their prescription. The legal basis of the application is extensive, and I invite you to read it in full. For now, I will simply say that it rests in part on well-established principles of international law. One of those principles is that peoples under occupation have a right to use armed force to resist their occupiers. It also rests on principles under the European Convention on Human Rights, including those relating to free speech and expression under Article 10. In addition to legal arguments, the application also rests on facts and evidence. One such fact is that Hamas won an election in 2006. In conclusion, I am instructed by Hamas to make today's application. The apartheid state of Israel is in the process of collapsing, and Zionism is in a terminal crisis. This raises profound questions about what will replace it. History seems to tell us that it will be necessary for the British and other governments to speak to people and organisations who win elections, even and especially if one disagrees with some of their values and actions. The application has today been submitted to the British Secretary of State, and she is invited to take an important step towards peace by deprescribing Hamas.
So in summary, the legal case is arguing that the UK's prescription of Hamas is, number one, a contradiction of Britain's obligations under international law, number two, a violation of human rights, and number three, disproportionate and politically motivated. It's important to note that this case and supporting this case should not be understood as supporting Hamas or any other group itself. It's up to the Palestinians who they elect and who they support. Supporting this case for deproscription is not the same as supporting the organisation itself. So, is it going to work? There are low chances of a government that is a participant in genocide suddenly growing a conscience and changing its ways overnight. However, what this case is going to do now is force them to be open and blunt in public about the fallacy of their commitment to so-called British values. If the Home Secretary puts her own career or personal enrichment over stopping support for genocide, at least the charade is well and truly over. No one can spout anything about the British state apparatus and the Labour Party in particular having any commitment to democratic values, equality, individual liberty, the rule of law, and so on. If not during a genocide, then when? They're not tethered to any values. It's just simply, whose tribe do you belong to? The white one or the wrong one? Click here for an in-depth podcast with one of the lawyers as soon as it comes out, inshallah, and check the link in the description below to read all the detailed reports and arguments.